Globalization is just this idea that just think about in the past, right? If you lived in the 1600s and you wanted to correspond with somebody who was several hundred miles away, how long would that take? How would you do it? But now, today, we've got our cell phones, we've got email, we've got computer, we've got Zoom, we've got planes, we've got trains, we've got cars, we've got all these things that basically make taking and moving ideas and people and resources from one place to another. It happens a lot more quickly than in the past. So almost the world has shrunk. So not in size on absolute size, but the way we experience the world, it feels like it's smaller because we've got all this new technology. But remember that with ideas and people and things being exchanged like that, diseases are also exchanged too. So bad things come along with globalization, along with the good things. So let's go over what is it, kind of what are the impacts for anthropology briefly. So globalization refers to the worldwide intensification of interactions and increased movement of people, goods, money, and ideas within and across national borders. So in the past, our national borders look different. Today, they are where they are, but they still are kind of in flux because different places on the globe are still kind of arguing about where that invisible imaginary line should lie. So globalization overall has not really resulted in significant improvements for a lot of communities across the globe. We tend to think of it as a really good thing because, for instance, I can place an order. I mean, how many things do you purchase that say made in China, made in Indonesia, made in Taiwan, right? Very few things say made in America. So globalization has been great for the Western world because when we were out there colonizing everyone, we became rich. We stole all their resources. We became rich. And so but we became rich by not paying people for their labor. So here in the United States, we've got, compared to other countries, relatively strict labor laws. So what we can do instead of paying people good wages here is we can move our factories overseas and pay those people way less. And they normally, a lot of these people are in poverty. They don't form unions because they need that job to live. So we can, we being corporations here in the US can still make a ton of money by relocating factories and businesses elsewhere and shipping things over to the United States. But is this great for the communities where people live that we're exploiting, that we put these sweatshop factories in? No, right? And essentially what globalization has done is has created these globalized inequalities where a place called the global north, which is most of the colonizer countries, has become very, very rich, and the global south, the countries that were colonized and exploited by the Western industrialist capitalists, that they've become very, very poor. So globalization and anthropology have always been intertwined because people have always been setting out trying to find new resources that they can claim for themselves and their country and their people. So, globalization today is characterized by a few key dynamics. The first one is kind of that thing I was referencing where the world feels smaller. And this is what we refer to as time-space compression. So, we can refer to this as the rapid innovation of communication and transportation technologies. So, this is, where I was mentioning how long it would take to get information or to receive a letter or to get communication from someone in the past versus now. It changes the way that we think about space and time. We've got things like jet travel, superhighways, computers, digital cameras, things that people in the past could never have, comprehended. So this has changed how we do things. So instead of sending letters, most people send emails now. We shift our culture because of the technology that we have that's making it easier to connect in a rapid way. But it also has changed our expectations of how people interact. So, for instance, how long are you expected, like, how long do you think you should take to respond to a text or an email? And it might change whether it's your friend, your parent, or your teacher. But there are specific expectations that if I send you an email and I say, hey, you plagiarized, and you have 2 days to get back to me, or I'm gonna, file a report with the college, you know that you need to get back to me quickly. Whereas if you've got a friend that you haven't seen in 10 years and they're like, hey, I'm coming to hang out to in blank location next to you for 3 months, you know that you kind of have more of a fudge period because you have a different relationship with them than you do with me. But by and large, these types of communication technologies have increased how fast we expect people to respond to us and how fast we expect to get information. So, like, if you type something into Google, you're expecting to get a response really, really fast. And in, previous eras, you would have had to go to the library, you would have had to check out a book or look at repositories and check all that information yourself. So it's changed our behavior. Technology and globalization have changed our behaviors, have changed our interactions, how quickly those things happen. Another key dynamic is something called flexible accumulation. These are strategies that corporations use to accumulate profits in an era of globalization. So, being flexible with how much you stretch, like ethics and laws, to get the things that you desire. So, for instance, looking for cheap labor, looking for countries to put your corporation in that are very lax in their environmental laws. Like we put taxes on some corporations that pollute too much. And other countries don't necessarily do that because they want the business because it results in income for their people. You might look for countries or states that have a lower tax and locate your business there. So it's flexible business structures that allow corporations to create as much profit as possible. And this is something that is allowable via globalization. Part of this flexible accumulation is something called offshoring. Offshoring is when wealthy countries, like those in the Western world, move factories to export processing zones in poorer countries. I briefly mentioned this earlier. So, made in America is still not very common, but is even more rare as it gets replaced with something that's assembled in the USA. People will buy that because they think it's better, which maybe to a degree it is, but it doesn't mean it was manufactured in the United States. So offshoring is looking for cheaper places that you can put your processing facility and then ship those things back to the US to make more profit because you pay the people that are doing the actual manual labor so little. This is similar but distinct from something called outsourcing. So, outsourcing, you still have your building, like your brick and mortar facilities in the country that your corporation is located, or, I don't know, like where it's founded. But you shift part of the work or as much of the work as possible to employees in other parts of the world. So, for instance, this is why call centers are so rarely operated by people who live in the United States. So a lot of call centers are located in India now because it's cheaper than paying people to do that work here in the United States. And they don't necessarily have to put like the same kind of brick and mortar facility there. So they can just employ people at their homes and they don't have to give them a workplace. So it ends up being cheaper. So offshoring and outsourcing are two key parts of this flexible accumulation technique or method, but they are different. They're not synonymous. Moving now to migration. One of the huge kind of consequences imply something bad here, but I don't mean that. I mean, one of the huge effects of globalization is increasing migration around the world. And I mean, even within countries, moving between states, between coasts, for instance, and between countries, moving from one country to the next. When we're talking about migration within a country, the main kind of patterns that we see are people from rural areas primarily moving to urban areas. We don't really see too much of the converse where people from urban areas move to rural areas. And this oftentimes has to do with jobs, opportunities, or ways of life, right? So imagine you are a trans individual atheist in the deep Bible Belt. You're not going to feel safe there. So you're going to move to some place where there are more people like you because your identity will feel validated, right? So there are multiple factors that influence migration, but I would say that the strongest two are job availability and like life outcomes. So, oops, skipped my question here, but those are some of the motivating factors. So, migration also is influential in kind of global structures, and it helps build connections between distant parts of the world. But it can also reduce the hold of the local environment over people's minds. So, for instance, I can be in my house and then drive to the gym and then drive back in 24 hours, right? I don't really have to go out in nature. And I can go to the grocery store and I can purchase my groceries and I don't have to go out and harvest them or grow them myself. So what this does is in my mind, I don't see the natural resources that we are using and abusing around us. So it makes it really easy for me to go buy that thing that's in really unsustainable packaging. This is why the biggest polluting countries are Western industrialized nations. People who have to regularly go out into their environment and fish or hunt or scavenge or build their houses from like mud bricks or adobe that exist in the environment are a lot more likely to want to protect that environment because they see how much they're using, they see how dependent they are on it, and they understand that if they don't regulate how much they're using, that they are harming future people down the line, like their kids, their grandkids. But for us in the Western world who are so distanced from those things, it's really easiest for like, oh, global warming's not actually real, or deforestation, that's a them problem, not an us problem. So, this is, one of the big consequences. We also, another huge but a human-centric consequence is something called uneven development. And this is that when I referenced at the beginning that globalization has created this huge global inequality, this is what I'm talking about. We call it uneven development. And this is unequal distribution of those benefits that come from globalization. There are some benefits, I mentioned that, but there are some consequences. So, for instance, 3.9 billion people on this planet have internet access, but only 19.5% of the 1 billion people in the least developed countries are online. So this is saying that most of the people who have internet access are in overdeveloped countries, so countries where we've put an excess of wealth into developing them. So the global economy ends up pooling in two places. Wealth from one region, again, that's the global south, so kind of the southern half of the globe. Those are the largely exploited groups via colonization, that their money is being siphoned into the global north, the top half of the globe that has most of the industrialized countries that were the colonizers. It's being siphoned up in there. So this top half is getting really, really wealthy, and this bottom half is getting really, really poor. That results in less money going into infrastructure, things like roads, hospitals, water retaining resources like plumbing, that kind of thing down here. And we've got all those things the fact that you can flush your toilet paper in your house, well, most of you probably can. The fact that you can flush toilet paper in this country is so different from many other countries. That is a result of the wealth accumulated from colonization. That is a privilege that we have that many other places on this planet do not have. But globalization actually cannot exist without this uneven development. Oops, sorry. Let me back you up for a second. Because globalization, the technologies that we're talking about, they are developed through that excess wealth that comes from those exploited countries. There wouldn't, if we were kind of like a giant global socialism that we are all putting money in to a same pool and taking out only what we need, that would be more of a socialist approach, that we wouldn't have all these excesses to put into these crazy technologies that a lot of people only have this, if you think about Bezos and, if you think about, if he's trying to put money into living forever, he can only advance those technologies because of the crazy amount of wealth that he's amassed, which he has done by exploiting other countries and other groups of people. So globalization, having all these technologies that bring us closer together and compress space and time, is dependent on the exploitation of certain groups. So again, give and take. There are some pros and cons, and this is why I don't really understand people who see the world in black and white, because even if you think there's a black and white issue, I promise you I can find the gray in it. And many of us who are anthropologists are very practical and very practiced in finding where these gray areas are. Most of the time, when something's black and white, it's only black and white to you or the people that think like you, not people who think differently than you. So when you talk to other people who have different perspectives, if you get on that Reddit forum, you get on TikTok, you can actually find the gray by comparing your two perspectives. One person thinks it's black and white this way, one person thinks it's black and white this way, and turns out the gray is where your opinions overlap.